in the most likely case, this period will show temporarily higher prices, but not persistent inflation.
And for more on this, let's bring in Peter Schiff. He's the chief economist and global strategist with Euro Pacific Capital, a division of AGP. Peter, thanks for coming on. Always appreciate having you on the show. Now, you just heard what the Fed chair says, and he's continued to say the recovery will cause a temporary increase in inflation, but it will eventually level out, but won't do anything until it actually goes well above that threshold of 2%. What do you make of the current policy position by the Fed?
Well, it's laughable. First of all, we don't even have a recovery. What we have is inflation, and it's that inflation that's masquerading as a recovery. But the economy itself is a mess. It's weak. It hasn't recovered. All we're doing is spending the money that the Federal Reserve prints. But that money printing, that is inflation. And that's what's driving the appearance of economic growth. But this is a bubble. It's a disaster waiting to happen. And prices ultimately are going to skyrocket. And I don't care what Powell says. Maybe they have the tools to deal with it, but they'll never use them because in doing so, they'll destroy the house of cards that they worked so hard to erect.
And what tools would you be looking at for the Fed to do? I know you're not necessarily a fan of their easy policy that they've been doing, but what could they do in your mind to actually do the right thing, even if it might harm the economy in the short term?
Well, it doesn't harm the economy. It harms the bubble by popping it. But what they need to do is reverse everything they've been doing. So they need to start shrinking the money supply and allowing interest rates to rise. And that's going to pop bubbles all over the place, including forcing the U.S. government to massively cut spending. So not only do we have to cancel any future stimulus, but we have to take back the stimulus of the past. We have to deliver either substantial cuts to government spending or tax increases, and not just to the rich, but to average Americans. And so I don't see that happening. I just see more and more inflation. And so that is the way all the government is going to be paid for, through inflation, which means consumer prices are going to go through the roof.
And is this damage in your mind and put forward by the Fed? Is that already set in stone? There's really nothing we can do beyond what you just mentioned there.
No, I mean, we're on autopilot here on the road to inflation. And remember, the Federal Reserve said the same thing about the mortgage crisis in the early days of subprime. Don't worry about it. Everything is fine. It's contained to subprime. Well, they were completely wrong. We had a financial crisis. Now they're saying the same thing about the big rise in consumer prices and producer prices. Anybody who's not blind can see it. And the Fed is saying, oh, don't worry, because it's all transitory. Well, how do they know it's transitory? Inflation is just as transitory now as subprime was contained then. They were wrong then, and they're even more wrong now.
And let's talk about what you can do to deal with inflation. You know, gold is generally seen as a hedge against inflation or really any economic worry that we might see. And it's been on an upward trajectory over the last week, despite a minor decline on Monday. What's your outlook for gold at this point?
Well, it was down again today. I mean, a lot of people who hold gold are getting frustrated because they see all the inflation and they're wondering why gold is not reacting. Well, the reason gold is not really moving up is because most of the people in the market believe the Fed. They believe that the Fed will put out any inflation fire before it gets too big. They actually think that inflation will be contained. When they realize that it won't be, that inflation is headed much, much higher, and that there's absolutely nothing the Fed is prepared to do about it, that's when the price of gold is really going to take off.
Peter Schiff, chief economist and global strategist with Euro Pacific Capital. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.